Hello and good evening all. It's a bit of a shorter video this week as I'm at a work conference and that of course takes precedence. So tonight we're going back to a Can-Am racer that really deserved inclusion in either Oddity Week, and actually almost got it. Underdog Week would have gotten it if I'd broadened the scope a little bit or hadn't narrowed it so much, or both depending on one's predilections. We're talking tonight about the Schkee DB-1. It's spelled S-C-H-K-E-E, as you probably saw in the headline, so my thinking would be that such pronunciation would thus be Schkee, but as this is a racing channel and not a linguistics one, we will take Motorsports Magazine's written pronunciation and go with it, with further explanation of why it's pronounced that way later in the video. The Shakee came to us from two paths that, much to Robert Frost's chagrin, converged in our racing wood. The first was through the reboot of the Can-Am series in 1977. The top-tier race series for the SCCA through the 60s and early 70s, it had been dominated initially by Lola chassis, then by McLarens during the Bruce and Denny show era until Mr. McLaren's untimely passing, before Porsche came along with their most radical, and increasingly radical thereafter, version of the 917, eventually culminating the 917/30, and raced everyone else into the ground in 72 and 73. This caused the series to fold from a lack of interest, quelle surprise, exacerbated by the contemporaneous oil crises in 1974, giving way to Formula 5000, which had been increasing in popularity as a sort of lower-cost, come-as-you-are open-wheel series for single-seaters, some of which were otherwise ineligible for competition for one reason or another. Actually, are there any open-wheel series that aren't single-seaters? Come to think of it? I don't really care about open-wheeling all that much for the most part, so I don't know. But anyway, F5000, however, rather continued the Can-Am tradition of single-manufacturer dominance, with Mr. Eric Broadley's Lolas back on top, specifically the T332, and specifically again the T332s driven by Mr. Brian Redman. That's not to say he was without challengers, with Formula 5000 attracting considerable talent in those days, including Al Unser Sr., Jody Scheckter, Mario Andretti, and Jim Hall. Well, actually, I lumped Mr. Hall in with the others, but he was acting in a very different capacity. He was running his race team, rather than driving. He had hung up his racing overalls some years before, as well as his drafting pencils, after lobbying by other teams resulted in first the banning of his enormous rear-winged cars, and then the very radically excellent 2J fan car. And so he had instead partnered with Carl Haas, and Mr. Redman to run Lolas in the F5000 Championship. Naturally, they did rather well. Redman dominated the championship from 74 to 76, the years that it was the range-topping SCCA event, and come 1977, the SCCA decided to revive the Can-Am Championship with modified rules, essentially as an evolution of Formula 5000 with closed-wheel bodywork. Our other path comes through a channel favorite subject, the Helmet turbine experimental jet car from the late 1960s. Bob McKee had helped co-design this car with Mr. Ray Heppenstall and was still active in the racing world when the reboot of Can-Am came along a decade later. He had some experience with the series prior to that point as well, having pioneered the use of turbos, and he took some well-meaning guidance from a one Mr. Mike Williams, industrial designer, when he was looking at designing a car for the rebooted series. Mr. Williams had told him that his cars looked outdated, which I actually take a bit of offense to on his behalf, considering the TX, but perhaps hindsight has something to do with that as well. Be that as it may. Taking Mr. Williams's feedback to heart and putting his design sensibility to use as a design consultant, and given the new Can-Am rules being unable to innovate much in any direction apart from aesthetics, McKee had partnered with Doug Schultz's racing team to build a custom-designed rebody of the ubiquitous Lola T332 that had dominated the Formula 5000 Championship. Most of the other Can-Am entrants that first season used Lolas as well, but without as much effort put into restyling the cars from their previous lives as single-seaters. Nevertheless, the mechanical underpinnings were essentially the same, and thus consisted of a steel and aluminium, because it's from Britain, monocoque chassis, with the engine and transmission assembly a fully stressed member of the chassis. In SCCA and Can-Am applications, these were almost always 5-liter Chevy
V8 motor,
although the Lola could also take a Repco Holden power plant and did an ANZAC competition more frequently than elsewhere. Of course, we had a 5-speed Hewland gearbox sending power to the rear wheels, front wishbones with coil springs and shock absorbers, while rear suspension was a single top-linked independent job, also with coil springs. Power output, depending on any fettling with the engine and the quality of the engine build, generally ran between 5 and 600 horsepower and about 360 pound-feet of torque, and the T332 weighed in single-seater guys at least, at 650 kilos or 1,433 pounds. The Shakee design took this base, said, why break what isn't broken? Also, we're not allowed to, and pretty much just added some delightfully futuristic bodywork over top. Incidentally, the Shakee nameplate was, perhaps unsurprisingly, just a portmanteau of Mr. Schultz's and Mr. McKee's names, so no points for creativity there, but at the same time, at least it was a bit more creative than an alphanumeric yeah, they named the model the DB-1. Boo! Anyway, this new bodywork was all fiberglass, as usual for the era, but the bodywork was decidedly unconventional. A cooperative design between Williams and McKee, and one reportedly done entirely by sight and instinct, without a wind tunnel involved at all. I do think you can still see echoes of the T332, particularly around the front wheels and splitter, but from there back, many things change. Not only did they do away with the rather ungainly top intake from the source car, replacing it with this wonderfully sleek semi-open body that looks as though the Probe 16 from Clockwork Orange and a Porsche 910 had a forbidden love child after too many pina coladas and getting stuck in the rain with their open tops. I love the sculpting of the side intakes into the essentially still exposed radiators, although I could see that being a weak point in the design for longer races or dirtier tracks. I also like the aero covers for the rear wheels. Those are always a welcome styling addition, and the body-integrated rear wing in the original design. To be sure, the latter two features were reportedly not retained for long. The rear wing allegedly created so much downforce and was of relatively lightweight construction that it bowed in the middle at speed, and during the car's first race outing, the rear wheel covers caused sufficient bother that they nearly cost the car its race, which we'll get to in a moment, and hence why most of the photos we've been seeing here have been of the car with a more conventional rear wing and no rear wheel covers. 2 DB1s were constructed, with the first just ready for the 1977 Can-Am season opener in Montreal at the Circuit Mont-Tremblant-Saint-Jovite, and I mean just. It was a day late and nearly missed qualifying. In fact, by the time the team had arrived, the event had nearly taken on a very different pallor to the normal mood for a season opener, after Brian Redman had nearly died during practice the previous day when his T333 became airborne and landed upside down, breaking Mr. Redman's neck at the C1 vertebrae, fracturing his shoulder and sternum, and perhaps unsurprisingly giving him a concussion. He was in fact declared dead, especially dead after the ambulance taking him to hospital blew a tire, but through some serious main character plot armor, he not only survived, but would recover and make his return to racing at Sebring in 1978, winning the event in a Porsche 935. He remains active in historic racing to this day, and if his motto isn't per adversa ad victoriam, it really should be. Thus, with the reigning and incontrovertible champion of the preceding series out of the picture, the new Shakee, driven by Tom Klausler, described by Motorsport as a talented but broke Formula Atlantic racer, looked poised for a strong showing after his car outqualified the other Lolas and Chris Amon's Wolf Dallara to take pole position for the event. This was further supported by a strong start to hold the lead despite wet conditions, but an early spin, along with the weather clearing, meant that he had to come in to change tires, which, with the rear bodywork design, apparently took 4 minutes, or approximately 3 glacial epochs in racing terms. Still, the job was accomplished, and Klausler was sent out to hunt down all the time and places he'd lost, 1 second at a time, which he started to do every quarter of a lap, reeling in race leader John Gunn at such a furious pace that he forced Gunn into taking a curb too hard, breaking a wheel, at which point it was a pretty clear sail to an inaugural victory for the car and the series by more than a lap. But it was not to last. The next round in the series at Laguna Seca saw the car on pole again, but a suicidal oil pump forced their retirement before the green flag ever fell. Qualifying second at the third round at Watkins Glen, a differential failure ended Klausler's race early, and after that the wind rather went out of the team's sails. Schultz drove the second car in only one event, at Road America, as best I could tell, and reportedly never really had the talent to make the most of it, qualifying 30th while Klausler was 8th in the sister car. Neither car finished that event, both with bodywork or accident damage. Out of money at the end of the season, the number 7 car, the first chassis, was sold on to Tom Spaulding, not the African Explorer, that was Captain Spaulding, who campaigned it in the 1978 season, but again without success, and thus the Shakee was shaken out. Or something. I don't know. Originally I had written the Shakee faded into history, but that seemed worse, and I tried to ad-lib something more clever, but have failed. One of them was up for sale back in 2019 with an ask of $249,000 US, and although the original listing is no longer accessible, it is presumably the car we're looking at here. I'm not sure where it picked up the Sony livery in the interim, but everyone needs a sponsor, I guess. I haven't seen it on any entry lists since the 2022 MITI, although no longer living in Georgia, I may just have missed it. At the time it was based out of Atlanta, but who knows? Perhaps it's been sold on to a new location and owner. Either way, musings for another time. Incidentally, Mr. Schultz actually has a YouTube channel upon which he has posted some old footage of the car running. He has only 7 subscribers and not many views, so head over to there after this video, link in the description, and let him know that his work is still being appreciated almost 50 years after the fact. And hey, maybe poke him and see if he might want to do an interview on this channel and talk more about the car. Anyway, that brings us to the end of the video, and for this week's call to action, not featuring the 3 sacred words of YouTube,
like, comment, subscribe.
Don't forget to check the air in your tires if you, like myself, have anything of sufficient vintage not to have automatic tire pressure sensors. I went to take the MG out for a drive last weekend, as it was one of the first nice days we've had in over a month, and my right front was at 10 psi, just hardly suitable for backroad cruising. Actually, I could have just used the thing about the other Shakee video as a call to action, but I didn't think about that in time. Anyway, that just leaves it for me to say, as always, thank you for your time this evening, or whenever and wherever you are watching, and I wish you all good night and a good tomorrow.